Trailblazer, disruptor, game changer, award-winning champion of the people's rights. These are all words that fit beautifully with our next guest. The first sex worker to be elected into Parliament, not once but twice, a survivor of deadly cancer 3 times. I'm Penny Lane and In the Driver's Seat starts now. Incredibly, Fiona Patten started her working career as a fashion designer and the creator of her own label. It was her daring designs which brought her into contact with sex workers, people she would later go on to fight for. While becoming a sex worker herself, she founded the Peak Body for the adult industry, campaigned for law reform in the sex industry, and fought to win 2 terms in the Victorian State Parliament. I am thrilled to say that she joins me now. Fiona Patten, welcome to In the Driver's Seat.
Thank you, Penny.
Now let's start at the very beginning. Your family life, it seems you had a fairly conservative upbringing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, my mother was English and came from a very proper English family, and my father was an officer in the Australian Navy. So we travelled a lot as a family and as children. So yeah, pretty stock standard naval brat type of upbringing.
And did you always have a rebellious streak?
Look, I mean, I would say no, but I suspect my family may have different views on that. I think being the oldest child, you sometimes do. You're the person that pushes the barriers, and certainly my younger siblings have always thanked me for that.
That's good. Now tell us about your fashion label, Body Politics.
I know it's funny when you think back to the work that I've done over the last 20 years, that back when I was in my 20s, to call my label Body Politics. And it was a fashion label in Canberra. It was the first business that took on local labels, and we brought a lot of the Oxford Street new Sydney designers and new Melbourne designers to sleepy old Canberra. And yeah, it was a really vibrant spot. It was very social. Although I have to say, if I'd sold champagne as well as clothes, I would have made an awful lot more money.
Yeah, it might have been a bit more fun. And through your collections, you came into contact with some sex workers. Is that right?
That's right, because when we set up this business, we were just entering into the recession that we had to have, according to our Prime Minister Keating. And that meant that, very few people in Canberra really had that disposable income to buy one-off fashion and limited designs. And so I met lots of sex workers. I met lots of people from the LGBTIQ community, but that certainly led to an ongoing relationship with a lot of the sex workers, and led to sort of 3 a.m. fashion shows out in the industrial areas of Canberra where the brothels were situated. So we would do champagne breakfasts at 3 a.m. after the brothels closed and have a bit of a fashion parade. And yeah, it really instilled a great sense of camaraderie with myself and the fashion label and sex workers.
Yeah, and what was it about the adult industry that really grabbed you?
Look, I think it was, I don't think I ever found myself as being that kind of warrior for people who were being discriminated against, but that was exactly what was happening. And you could see that here were women, largely women, I mean, obviously there was men as well, but women working to support themselves, going to university, to support a family, and yet they were having to work underground. They were being stigmatized and discriminated, and I couldn't understand what all the fuss was about, because really this was just sex, which was something that, I personally enjoyed, and I think most of us have enjoyed it. So I could not understand why there was this incredible moral judgment on people in that on people working in the industry, but also why the law pushed them underground and accepted that they would continue to exist, but would exist illegally.
You and your partner Robbie founded the Eros Foundation. What did it do?
This was an industry association that represented the adult industry across all aspects of it. So the adult stores, and then later on the adult web industry, but also the very popular and very large mail order industry. But also it represented brothels, it represented escorts, it represented adult entertainment. So we saw that our opponents, the opponents to sex work, were the same opponents who opposed adult entertainment or adult stores. So we decided to join forces and create this one national association that, is now in its 35th year of operation, and has been at the forefront of internet regulation, but also in this idea that we want to keep politicians out of people's bedrooms.
Yeah, not a bad idea. Now, what major wins did you gain through your campaigning?
Sorry, could you just say that question again?
Yeah, of course I can. What major wins did you gain through your campaigning?
Look, when we had the Eros Association, I mean, many of our members were operating outside the law. Now, we argued that the law was a very bad law. And I think, it's a modest success, but we managed to keep every one of our members safe, and out of jail and out of the courts. And that took a lot of lobbying and a lot of public relations work to ensure that people understood that these were dumb laws and that police should not be forced to enforce them. I think also when it came to the emergence of the internet, and it came to the emergence certainly of the adult industry being at the forefront of the internet and of providing sort of entertainment and providing services that people were willing to pay for, we at the industry really ensured that while Australia was making some really stupid statements around internet censorship, we ensured that in the background those statements never came into fruition.
Good for you. I think that's a really big win. Now, is it true that you really were a sex worker yourself for 2 years?
Yeah, I was, Penny. Yeah. And look, it was one of those spur of the moment things, but something I've never regretted. And I was actually doing outreach for sex workers. So I was providing condoms and HIV information, safe sex information, and also helping any sex workers who had a problem. But the problem on that particular night was that there was no sex workers available at one of the brothels that I was visiting. So they were looking for someone, and I was there and thought, why not?
Good for you.
And it wasn't, it wasn't, as I say, it wasn't something I regretted. But I think probably the hardest thing was when a few years later, the Sydney Morning Herald, one of our major papers, published a front page story about it, and that was an interesting way to explain to my parents and family my side hustle.
You're so beautiful and classy. I bet you were completely booked out. You're probably going to get a few calls after this. I hope Robbie doesn't mind. What did it teach you about the industry that you represented?
Look, I think one of the things, and this this goes for many people, and it's not just sex workers, that it's this double life that you are forced to live, so that on one side the work can be pleasurable. You're dealing in sex work, you're working in female-dominated spaces, you're being paid well, you have a great flexibility in the work, but you can't tell people outside work what you do. Yeah. Now, I've seen this for people who use medicinal cannabis, or people who use cannabis for recreational purposes. They have to kind of lie to friends and family, or lie to their employers or their work colleagues about what they do. So it was this sort of keeping this sense of having to remain in the closet. And I think when we look back to the fights of our LGBTI community, it really felt like we had to come out of our closet. And I think that is the hardest thing. And it's the hardest sort of judgment and moral judgment of particularly women who decide to provide sex.
There really is that stigma there. I remember working in Yellow Pages many moons ago, and a lot of the girls that I worked alongside did sex work on the side as well, but it was a total secret. Now, at that time, that was when HIV and AIDS was a massive issue. Was you worried about that?
No, because we ran safe sex. It was a very safe sex only. It was always protected sex. You certainly had a lot of clients who would think, look, you're a sex worker, you practice safe sex, so obviously we don't have to practice safe sex. So there was always pressure put on sex workers by clients. My response to clients quite often was, yeah, but I don't, who else do you have sex with? And he'd say, oh, yeah. So, well, I don't know who your wife has sex with. So, let's keep this a protected interaction. So no, I wasn't. I had friends with HIV. So
same.
Today, seeing the treatment available for HIV really makes my heart sing, because in those days it quite often was a death sentence.
Definitely was. And we're almost out of time. But when did you decide that you wanted to have a crack at politics?
Look, I was the most unlikely politician. I never really wanted to go into politics. I saw some of my friends going in, and I felt like you had to leave your soul at the door. But really, it was out of frustration. So back in the early 2010, we felt like the community was going in one direction on civil liberty policies. So whether that was internet censorship, assisted dying, marriage equality, drug law reform, that the community was going in one direction, but our politicians and our governments were going in the other direction. And so it was out of that frustration that we decided to take those issues to the polling booth. And then I think, much to a lot of people's surprise, after a couple of years of campaigning doing that and running for elections, I was elected into the state parliament in 2014, and then re-elected in 2018.
Amazing career. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Fiona. Really appreciate your time, and what a fascinating story. Would love to sit down and chat to you more. Thank you very much, Fiona Patten.
Thanks, Penny.
In the Driver's Seat is brought to you by the Perfect Cosmetics Company. This is Ticker, and we'll be right back.
You're watching Ticker. We'll have more in just a few minutes.